Today we begin our teaching and learning along the Borderland speaker series. So something that I want to do for you all is to bring you lectures, symposiums that are centered on the social justice of education at the Borderlands, because that is where we're situated at the Cali Baja and specifically our Imperial Valley Mexicali border region. And in this speaker series, we're going to have scholars, we're going to have organizers who are centered, who dedicate their work to the social justice of students, vulnerable student populations at the Borderlands. So this is an opportunity for you all to see what we've been reading, what we've been studying in action. And there's no better way to do this than to learn from those educators that are not just talking the talk, but really walking the walk regarding serving our diverse students here in the Imperial Valley and beyond. So with no further ado, I want to formally introduce our guest today, Carlos A. Fitch. He is originally from Imperial Valley, alum from SCSU Imperial Valley, like a lot of you that will be or have already graduated from our campus here. And when he was a student, he served many roles. One of those was AS president. He was also part of the Chicana student organization and also had a great hand in student leadership and activism on our campus. So if you remember last week, a couple of weeks ago, we tuned into the Blowouts documentary. Well, student leadership, student activism really has a hand in shaping social justice and education. But that lecture will be for next week. Today, what we want to focus on will be on our Imperial Valley borderlands and specifically our queer transborder students. So intersectionality is a concept that I would love for you to start learning today, because it's a concept that really allows for the critical conscious understanding of our diverse students and the multiple social identities that they bring with them. So more about Carlos. So from serving here at our campus as a student leader, he went on to pursue his master's in education at Cal State Long Beach. From there, he went on to UC Santa Barbara. Currently is working on his PhD in education. Already in his very young career, he's published multiple pieces on transborder students and overall education and queer transborder identity as well. And today we're going to be learning a little bit about that research and that work. So with no further ado, Carlos, I'm going to go ahead and pass on the mic. You have the floor, you have the mic. Welcome.
Thank you, Profe. Hi, everyone. Sorry for my mess. It's very hot over here for some reason. Santa Barbara never gets like valley weather, and today it's very hot. It's like over 90 degrees, and I forgot about that. So hi everyone again. Thank you for the invitation to share my work, and I was trying to share the article on the chat, but I couldn't, so I'm gonna follow up with an email. And so to get us started, I'll talk a little bit more about my path to where I am now in terms of like geography, of course, but the scholarly identity that I have now. And going back to the concept that you're learning this week, which is intersectionality, and the complicated path to really do a study research that is truly intersectional. And so the presentation that I have for today is titled Rotating Along the Borderlands, Contextualizing Border Rurality among queer transfronterizx students in higher education. And yeah, before getting started with this, I forgot to add a slide on how this working together. Um, but after graduating from SCSU Imperial Valley and knowing that I wanted to dedicate my life and like my professional life on helping vulnerable communities in higher education, I took a job at Imperial Valley College, and it was actually an intersectional job. I was tasked with supporting undocumented students and queer and trans students. And so this required going against a lot of the policies that didn't include these students in mind, um, especially if you think about the geographic location of Imperial Valley College. There is an ICE facility right less than a mile away from there. So for us to truly help undocumented students, it was very hard. And I think back in the time, policies were not really established to understand what were those needs. Um, and usually all of the funding constraints to how you serve them. So that was on one side of the spectrum of my job at the community college. And the other one, helping creating programming and visibility for queer and trans students. It was also very challenging. We know that Imperial Valley is a very conservative community, even though it's predominantly Latinx. That doesn't mean that we are a liberal, open society towards minorities within our predominantly Latinx community. And that is truly reflected in the curriculum that we see, especially at the community college with an overwhelming majority of white faculty. Um, there's a lot of these stereotypes that are transmitted on students. And so there was a point that I felt very frustrated in my professional career, and I just couldn't do it, and I left. I went to Long Beach Community College thinking that it was going to be better, much more liberal society, much more funding attached to the position, and it wasn't any better. Um, we were serving a more intersectional group of students, um, but I realized that it is actually not the institutions, it is actually not the passion that you put on the work, but the constraints limited by the policies that do not allow us to better help our students. Um, and so that really ignited me to apply and enroll into a PhD program, focusing on policy research methods and program evaluation to see how the different funding guidelines attached to educational institutions are really recreating and reproducing the hierarchies and the constraints and the boundaries in truly helping, in this case, Latinx students at the borderlands. And so what I'll talk to you about today is my master's thesis from when I was at CSU Long Beach. And this thesis focuses on students who cross the border, Transfronterizx, who also identify as part of the LGBT community and live in a rural community. So I'm pretty sure that you read Crenshaw. Is that correct, Vanessa?
Yes, this week. This week we are on Crenshaw.
Yeah, so you probably saw that figure on intersectionality that has multiple circles, multiple identities, and how they overlap within one another. And if any of you decide to pursue a master's in education or social sciences and you're investigating human subjects, um, it is not really recommended to investigate like so many intersectional identities because it's hard. And so that was one of the criticisms that I got from my advisor 2 years ago, who told me, you're researching border communities or border identities, you're researching Latinx communities, Korean trans communities, and then rural communities. So that's four axes within the intersectionality spectrum. And it is challenging. And if you go back to that reading from the 1990s, one of the things that it says is that um, it's very difficult to conduct a true intersectional study, and it is very difficult to do so without criticism from academics. Um, and it is also even more difficult to practice intersectional service. So what I'll present today is my attempt at doing that for communities that I care about and that I have been working with. Um, and then we're gonna open up for discussion. So for this presentation, I'll get us started with the background and the grounding of this study. Then I'm gonna review existing literature that talks about all of these communities. Um, I'm gonna talk about a new methodology used in critical race studies that it's called critical race feminista methodology, and its alignments with Otra studies and other frameworks. Then I'll talk about testimonial methodology, which is what I employed in this study. And then some of the findings, some of the stories that the queer and transfronterizo students provided me with, and then its relationship to policy and practice, and then I'll open for Q&A. So to start with, we all know, and I'm pretty sure that you have read about transfronterizo students. We are prevalent across and along the US-Mexico borderlands. If you think about any port of entry, it's pretty likely that there's going to be a student who is traversing the borderlands to get an education. This happens in K-12 systems and also happens on higher education, from a bachelor's degree all the way to a doctoral degree. And so the way that I characterize these border crossings is as a daily ritual. So it's a ritual of engaging with community knowledge, border knowledge. You have to understand how the politics are impacting the border so you can better navigate them. And so there's research that talks about how transfronterizo students are facing complicated journeys that are impacted by many reasons that are sociopolitical, sociogeographical, including accessibility to the border. So let's say that you don't live nearby one of them. So there's a lot of things you have to do to get into a port of entry. And then once you are there, there is a very likely hostile immigration policy that is going to be impacting you. And so all of this is characterized as an immigration mobility practice. So you are moving across different borders. And this happens in the context of US Mexico, but also in other countries that also have borderlands. So for transborder students, crossing the border requires an understanding and a motivation. And oftentimes this motivation is receiving an educational degree that is going to lead them to having better economic finances standing so they can ultimately help their families across the border. When we bring in the concepts of intersectionality and gender identity, sexuality, gender expression, queer and transfronterizo college students are facing so many more challenges that are shaped by these identities, but also by the geographic context. So we can think about the current policies and sentiments against queer and trans people and how these are being targeted, police criminalized, both in the social sphere, but also within higher education. So we can think about the context of your campus. There is probably not a openly safe space for queer and trans students. And in my times working for the Imperial Valley Community College, there wasn't established safe queer and trans space dedicated only for them. So there is a limited sense of services and also ultimately impacts the enrollment and the access for these students to higher education. If we also think about the space of Imperial Valley as a rural community, there is challenges in the environment. How are people perceived? How are people supported, seen, treated? And all of these sociocultural impacts the identity development of these students and whether or not they're going to be enrolling to colleges and universities nearby. So this study has two main questions that I'm asking. The first one is, how does these students navigate the intersection of their identities within context of border rurality? And then what are the systems of oppression and racism that are impacting these students? Okay. And so in order for me to come up to these questions and to what I wanted to do in my research, I had to dig into the literature for a couple months and really get familiar with what is out there, but most importantly, what is not. And so there have been recent developments on the field of rural education um, that are particularly attending to the needs of rural Latina communities. So think about the Imperial Valley. We are a rural Latinx predominant community, and if we really make a count of how many educational institutions, there's only two, SESU Imperial Valley and the Imperial Valley Community College. If we count that against the number of prisons, immigration offices, detention centers, those are way more. So there is research on the US Census that describes communities like the Imperial Valley as education deserts. Yeah. And so this comes from a larger understanding of regional impact of resources and access. So the concept was actually created when seeking to understand very poor countries that have food deserts, meaning there's no access to food. And they translated this concept to educational settings to talk about these communities that are isolated. Like if you think about Imperial County, all of its borders are immigration borders. We have a border with Mexico. We have a border with Arizona where you might be asked documentation to go to that side. We have a checkpoint in San Diego. We have a checkpoint in Indio. So you cannot really get out, whether if it's for family matters, getting an education. And here's where the intersectional lens comes in. And it's really asking us to remove the privilege of our citizenship, of our residency, but also our queer and trans identity or sexual orientation, which I'm going to provide an example later. So all in all, you can recognize that there's limitations in how we define rurality. It is not just this isolated space, but it is mainly the nuanced definition of where the residency is for students and whether it fits or not traditional aspects. So the way that I utilize it here is to highlight the structural inequalities in housing, healthcare, transportation, and the way that there is no opportunities within this geographically isolated concept. And so by thinking about rural settings, rural communities, through the lens of desiertos, deserts, we can see how systematic injustices are restricting the access to college and to any other opportunity that you can think of. Sorry, my animations are all messed up. And so as I was mentioning before, there have been these developments on research that are representing rural Latinx students, mainly by Dr. Mayra Puente, who is here also at UC Santa Barbara, and has really gone into the field, interview a lot of students and see what is happening with the access that they have or haven't had to higher education. And oftentimes what is reported is that there are a lot of financial hardships, inadequate preparation in high school, and limited resources. Some of these can see like, think about when you were in high school, did you receive the college preparation that was necessary? Do you have access to your counselors who were incentivizing you to go and visit other schools? Do you have the financial resource to do that? And so all of these different college preparation kind of programming allows high school students, particularly those from Latinx descent, to enhance their sense of college belonging and really trying to go there and see if they wanted that for their lives. And so ultimately, this impacts the enrollment. And what happens is that once rural Latinx students are enrolled, there are other institutional barriers that further challenge them to get a degree. We can think about the racial representation in our faculty, whether there is a community nearby that resembles home, and also the proximity to seeing family members. So, on a study by Dr. Puente in 2023, she describes that education deserts such as the Imperial Valley can and should be viewed as places of desire, meaning that we must celebrate these spaces as spaces of college access, and we can really reframe them from a limited perspective to rather a sense of collectivity for First Generation rural Latinx students, but also for their families. And so what I'm hoping to do with this study is bringing that concept to the rural borderlands. So when we think about the experience of rural college students, there are factors that deeply impact them, including the monitoring from immigration officers and the immigration policing that are impacting access and belonging within higher education institutions. When we look at the campus and we can, nearby the library, you can see very clearly the border, and you can see very clearly when CVP officers are running behind someone. That is not normal. And that is something that is very particular for our rural community because we are a rural borderland community. And it's something that is not represented in scholarly conversations. And so when we think about that lack of normality on everyday experiences of us, we can also go deeper and analyze what are the psychological forms of stress that are coming and resulting because of these type of inspections, these interrogations, and also the visibility of this type of policing. And so there are very few studies that have been created, and you have your professor sitting there who has been one of the few people who have done initiatives and programs to reverse instead of the psychological distress and emotional disorders. Educators at these institutions can also do the opposite, which is providing institutional support, provide opportunities of joy through an intersectional lens to incentivize, in this case, rural transfronterizes to continue their pathway in college and ultimately receive a degree. So these two studies that are highlighted in these citations here should be points of inspirations to see how you can better be educators and incentivize your students who are living through these distress time, emotionally hardships, and immigration policing in a way that can use their agency and thrive through college. And so ultimately, when putting all of that together and adding on the lens of queer and trans students, there are also isolating and desensitizing experiences associated with the discourse in these rural communities. There are perceptions and stereotypes that yield to high levels of homophobia, creating unfriendly environments. Research highlights the deeply severe consequences, all the way to suicide, that queer and trans students at the rural communities have done. And all of this because their identities are challenged. They experience violence and hostility through not just one single day, but on an everyday basis, which is a queer microaggression. The everyday and cumulative results of aggressions towards one's identity. And so, taking together all of that, how do I better make sense of those things that are converging and diverging within the literature, and what does apply and doesn't apply to queer and trans students? And so I do work employing critical race theory, critical race feminisms, and these theories that are grounded on legal discourse that better help in assessing the way that systemic issues are challenging our students in their pathways. And so, in particular, I use critical race feminista methodology, which is theoretical bridging or merging of critical race theory and Chicana feminist epistemologies. And the way that this works is by approaching commitments of intersectionality, community-based approaches, and the disruption of dominant ideologies. And within this theory, there is this additional perspective rooted on queer and trans Latinx knowledge, which I'm pretty sure many of you have heard the term joteria, and you can associate it with like really negative derogatory approaches. And so the way that Eddie Alvarez and Jorge Estrada, who are theorists at CSU Fullerton that have talked about this, is by recentering and remembering the ways that politics, sexuality, and epistemological justice can be appropriated with this concept of joteria studies. And so when we triangulate this one with the intersectional commitments of critical race feminism methodology, we can issue critiques and we can expand on theoretical contributions for specific communities that align to these identities. And so, as you can see, this is not just a theory, but it's also a methodology. That means that it encompasses an array of qualitative, quantitative, and visceral methodologies that can be implemented to better respond to these research questions. And so there are several ways in which this one employs critical race methodologies, and it's mostly through qualitative approaches that are honoring Latinx identity. And so these are the participants of this study. As you see, there's different people with an array of intersectional identities that you can note here. I'm gonna let you digest that for a little bit as I drink water, and then we're gonna proceed.
Do we have any questions up until this point?
So I think a question that I have for any one of you who might want to respond, in reflecting from the concept of intersectionality, where do you see it represented here?
Within the concept of intersectionality, where do we see it represented in the list of collaborators slash participants? Like within their race and their sexual orientation? Okay, race and sexual orientation. Any other areas?
Well, I don't know if it's a question, but like they all have their BA, their bachelor's.
Okay, they all have their BA.
So kind of like they with any obstacles they face, they got over it.
Okay, that's a good observation. Any other observations that are worth noting, or aspects of intersectionality that you see illustrated here?
Perfect. Thank you. Um, yeah, so there are specific areas that really surprised me when I was asking about these different identities. These are all real people. They might be sitting within us, like one of these identity might be represented of one of you. Um, but but I wanted us to put attention on Luisito. When I asked about their racial and ethnic identity, they responded, soy norteña, and that is a very interesting response. It's not the type of response that is traditional in the way of saying, oh, I am Latine, I am Mexican, it's norteña from the north. And I think it's very interesting if we analyze that from an intersectional lens. What does that mean in terms of the geographical alignment with identities, and how that shapes the way that they see their life along the borderlands. And yeah, I wanted to include here their educational experience because it is important to know what one of the students on the classroom said. They all went through graduate education to undergraduate education. And this data was gathered in 2023. So I can say now, and I have kept in touch with all of them, there is an additional paper that is coming out. And all of them have successfully graduated. And I want to say 5 out of them are now graduate students. So we can really see the evolution and las ganas, of wanting to succeed in education and represent the queer and trans Transfronterizx community in academia. Okay, and now let's go to the stories that these collaborators of this study provided me with, and that allow me to theorize on the way that they engage in these identity rotations. So I wanted to provide sort of like a map where you can see there's going to be 4 findings that I will present. And these are scattered across our community. We will get started first with closeted educational oasis. And when participants talk about that, it is mostly on the US side of our borderlands. They also talk about queer educational isolation, which happens within the 2 colleges that are present in our community. We also have the stories of transporter hypervigilance that mostly happens at the ports of entry. And then lastly, the way that our participants see the Mexican side of the border as a flexible place, which is not brutal. So it provides them privileges and access to non-brutal spaces, particularly for their queer and trans identity. And so one of the concepts that comes off from my analysis and that expands on Crenshaw's intersectionality is identity rotations. And this is presented in this paper for queer and trans transfronterizes, but it's not limited to them. I think that's something that anyone who has an intersectional identity possesses and engages in. So the definition of identity rotations is a survival strategy that students utilize to highlight certain identities depending on their context. And so identity rotations are responses to the violence and the systemic discrimination seen within any space, and this can include higher education, right? So in the example and for queer and transfronterizx, we can think about how one person may present or hide some part of their gender identity, gender expression to mitigate violence. Or you can think about spaces where you limit your use of Spanish, such as a border. You decide to speak to the officer in English. So that is an identity rotation. And so the purpose of these responses is to mediate physical, liminal, and transitory borders in their pursuit of higher education. Before moving on, any questions so far?
No questions.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So the first finding that I have for you is closeted educational oases. So the collaborators in this study defined the geographical space where they studied as an educational oasis, meaning that there is academic offerings, there are access to higher education, yet this is very minimal. And they talk about how you can study to become a teacher, a nurse, something in law enforcement, but there's nothing really outside of that. I think when I was conducting these interviews, they were barely opening a public health program, so that really expanded the opportunity for them. But one of them mentioned, I want to be an architect. I cannot stay in the valley because there's nothing like that. And so we can see how we're not talking about educational deserts, as the literature says, or rather oases, meaning that there are opportunities and you can access higher education, but it is very conditioned and very limited. And so one of the participants mentioned, and this is Luisito, who mentions that I'm gonna read the quote. I am in transition in my gender, more on the feminine side, very visible transgender person in this rural community. It adds a layer to a core trans experience for rural students, whether or not they have a trans-border experiences or not. The universities are not in this rural county. Educational access is not local to this rural county. And to get any type of holistic graduate education outside of becoming a border patrol agent or a teacher, there are very selective cohorts that are available locally, and you have to leave. And sorry for the, they're not misspellings, but some words are closer together. I exported it from PowerPoint and it got flunky. But yeah, so what we can see on this quote by Luisito is that they wanted to pursue graduate education in something else that wasn't law enforcement or education, being a teacher, right? And Luisito talks about the selective cohorts, which means that there are opportunities on social work, there are opportunities on nursing, but these are number one, selective, and they only come up every certain time. So I think you might be familiar with what I'm talking about. So if you really want to go into a graduate education, you have to leave. There is not really any other opportunity. So what we see represented here is the concept of educational oasis in contrast to education deserts that I talked about before. And so the analysis also provided the concept of combating educational isolation as a phenomenon that student leaders are engaging in. And these is student leaders who identify as queer and transfronterizx. And so we can see how the multiplicity of their identities or intersectionality is shaped by border crossings, which are both literally and figuratively. So coming out emerges as a form of border crossing for these students, especially those who are navigating educational isolation in the campuses at Imperial Valley. And so we have this story of Ariana, who is a bisexual Latina and was also a student leader. And so Ariana is telling us that the satellite campus that she went to is a very conservative community. And she felt that out of public rejection or public criticism, a lot of the events are not held on this campus because of the town history, as compared to the campus in the city, which is a much bigger and a bigger melting pot. And it's more understanding over there to be queer than it is to be here on this hometown. So as part of student government, Ariana was a student leader. She was trying to do a queer flag raising ceremony. And there were some issues with administration regarding this queer flag raising. Particularly, the neighbors around the campus didn't really want it there. So this quote is really reminding me of this space. I can literally see Ariana fighting for this in front of those flagpoles, trying to recognize Pride Month, you know. But because of the educational isolation, which she is combating here, she acknowledged that it's a queer educational isolation. There can be other flags that are raised, but not the queer one, because there are other political sources, such as the neighbors, that are combating on this. And so another theme that came up on the stories of these students is transborder hypervigilance. So on the trajectories of these students, there were moments of racial hypervigilance that emerged through state-imposed mandates, particularly at the border. So these students navigate the border surveillance as they access higher education, and this was applicable not just at the rural region, but all across the border. And so we have on the next slide the testimonial of Fabian, who offers an example of crossing the border with an openly trans identity. Okay, and so Fabian says here, when I wear makeup, it tends to be a huge thing in the border. The border patrol officers be like, can you wipe it off? I've had those interactions because they have to scan your face, and I think it's because of the scanners. And then Fabian says, you're just detecting my eyes. I don't know how your scanning machine just sucks so much. It's just blush base. It's nothing looking completely different. So if we think about this quote that Fabian is sharing, there are multiple layers to this identity and to this experience. Fabian is a trans Latina, meaning that they do not conform to gender norms. And this is something that conservative border patrol officers do not like. If you identify as a woman, do they ask you to remove the makeup? Probably not. So here we see how this hypervigilance is constantly applying into the experiences of queer and trans communities that cross the border, particularly trans people. And so now I'm going to go into some discussions and implications for practice and policy that came up. So as you know, and as I shared before, this study, the purpose of this study, it was to visualize and to share the counter stories of queer and trans Transfronterizx students through identity rotations, meaning these responses and strategic engagements that are challenging and using different portions of their identities to preserve humanity, dignity, and well-being as they're going through a border crossing or any other issue that is hoping or attempting to dehumanize them. So I was hoping we can do some like small groups and go over these two questions. I know that some of these stories can be triggering if you identify with one or more of these identities. maybe even if you don't identify with these identities, hearing these stories can be triggering. Um, so I kind of want to get a sense of how did it feel to listen to these stories? Um, and also thinking about like an empathetic educator mindset. How does it feel to know that maybe one of us or one of you sitting on the classroom could experience the same as Luisito, Ariana, Fabian, or have experienced it? And how would you challenge that?
All right, so if we can get in either pairs or threes, and pick one or the other to reflect and answer. Carlos, how does 5 or 10 minutes?
I think 5 minutes is
5
okay.
minutes, okay. So
Yeah.
let's take 5 minutes to discuss. All right. So either pairs or groups of three.
I would like to hear some of you, and yeah, like you can just speak up. Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. We're talking about how one of the many fears that transporter students have is when they cross the border, the thought of like, oh, me van a preguntar esto, or oh, they're gonna like look for an excuse to like set me aside. So we imagine that for trans students or queer students, that fear of being targeted, it's doubled or whatever you want, as in like, oh, if I wear clothing is not assigned, not my gender, or if I wear makeup. We're talking about how damaging that is for that person because they need to hide themselves and not furthermore call attention to themselves when they cross the border. And
Mhm.
not only damage themselves, but also the system because if they hide, we don't talk about it. Our students don't express themselves in the classroom. So yeah, that's basically our discussion we're having.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And I didn't get the chance to share here one more story, but one of the participants here talked about um, she's a trans Latina who was crossing the border to go to college. And again, like just what you shared, like this state of hypervigilance, like first of all, who is gonna be the officer that I'm gonna talk to? Like, are they a woman? Are they a male? Like coming up with those questions, like how should I speak to them? Should I maybe wipe my makeup? But the story that I didn't get to share here talks about the use of legal mechanisms to ensure that Border Patrol officers respect the gender identity of these students, especially trans students. And so, under the previous administration, there was the opportunity to put it on your passport, like gender nonconforming or something like that. Um, and so that is what the student did. But regardless of that, she had an experience where this officer asked her to get out of the car and literally punch her, you know. Um, so we have very troubling stories that sometimes out of respect for the participants, I don't share. Um, but our role as educators comes in once that happens, how are we receiving them to the classroom? You know, like how are we setting time apart to debrief on these violent episodes? And what are ways that as allies we can come up together um and sometimes stand for them, like maybe give them the opportunity to miss class to recover from these, um, referring them to counseling services, all of that. Yeah, thank you for sharing. I didn't get your name. What was your name?
Victor.
Victor, thank you. Anyone else?
My group and I, we talked about how like we don't have like as teachers like trying to be the reason why they look forward to crossing. You know, like they let's say this experience that these bad experiences that they're having, at least like, oh, I just at least I can't wait to see this teacher today, you know, and make sure that they have a safe space and that you are like a trusted adult where they could even at least because it could happen to anybody and but they might not have even the courage to share. So just like from the beginning of the year, kind of get like a like understand who's crossing every day and kind of just like casually always ask how they're feeling. So they at least have the courage to share with you. And what you mentioned already, but make sure that they step out of the classroom and take them to counseling. But a lot of times, students don't really trust counselors, because they're not with them every day. The person they trust is you. So I think that it's important that we also let the parents know if they want us to let them know. And yeah, just like creating a safe space, so they look forward to crossing.
Yeah.
I want to reflect on that for a moment, but first, Carlos, what are some thoughts that come to mind?
No, go ahead. You can go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, so in the literature on queer students overall, education at times is one of the very few safe spaces that they have. One of the very few. Unfortunately, whether it's in the community, family, even like friends or the loss of friends when, coming out. And again, education, the classroom is one of those very few safe spaces. So if you take that away, the consequences are so detrimental. They really even, realities of suicide or suicidal thoughts, psychosocial stressors, all of that. So for all of you who are aspiring to be educators or are already educators working in the classroom, just know the importance of that difference that you can make for your students in that safe space that you can be.
Yeah, I mentioned throughout the presentation that the literature reports the lack of safe spaces. But they talk about institutionalized safe spaces. Like you can think about the Pride Center or things like that. But also, as Dr. Falcon was saying, there's a lot of evidence that oftentimes these safe spaces are really safe people, safe communities that are acting as these agents of empowerment for our students. So yeah, definitely. Um, I think I have a couple more slides, so I'm gonna move on through them. Yeah. So in the paper that I'm gonna come back to these. So first, I'm gonna talk about these three things. Um, in this research project that I published, there are three actionable implementations that I provided as a way to like speak to educators, college leaders, and other people who can help on this. So the first one, it was thinking about the Hispanic serving institution context. There is a lot of money on those funds, but they very rarely integrate transborder students in their plans for serving at these institutions. So one of the actionable implications that can be done is ensuring that there is representation and funding for curriculum that accentuates the students' lives and experiences, but also faculty who are representative of those experiences. There's a lot of great scholars who cross the border on a constant basis to do their research. So it is important for these institutions to hire them and have them teaching classes so they can represent these funds of knowledge. The second one is thinking about campus policies. This is mostly, if you think about the K through 12 setting, the school district, back in the times, there were people hired to go and knock on residences and see if the students are living there. So changing, and I call these decolonizing the policies. And rather than hiring people to go and check if transfer students are living on the address that they say, what if you spend that money to actually affirm their identities, to provide initiatives and support that can be beneficial for them, not beneficial to the school district in reducing the number of students, but rather sustaining these students' education, offering them the right to an education, and also affirming their sociocultural identity. And then lastly, we always talk about programs. The literature is flooded with the way that basic need programs are necessary. but there's very little research that actually shows how these programs are implemented, sustained, passed along, and tailored for a specific communities, such as transborder students who are commuting between borderlands. So rethinking what student support means and where we are putting the money. Yeah, so these are three, I call them actionable implications for practice. And so to conclude for today, I invite everyone to like put our imagination in practice and think about the stories, the challenges, what the literature says, um, and thinking about yourselves as educators, educational leaders. If you had the institutional power and the title to transform education and ensure the humanity and dignity of these students, what would you do? So let's say that I have to include more calls to actions to this list of three practices. What would you do? So I'll invite you once again for about 5 minutes to discuss with your group, and then I'll take notes. So let's come back together, and I want to hear some of your thoughts.
I want you guys speaking over each other, so.
My group and I, we talked about how maybe as professors being lenient with attendance. Like if you know that your student is crossing every day, then say, you know what, it's okay, like just join on Zoom. Like just join, it's okay to join through Zoom and participate through there. Cause sometimes when you don't know what they have to go through, like they feel uncomfortable crossing, and maybe just offer them Zoom, to log into Zoom. We did mention how in K through 12 attendance is mandatory, but
Yeah.
in higher education, if you could help them as much as you can, then I think you can be lenient with like even tardy or
Yeah.
to.
Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Oh no, that's it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. One more idea.
Hello again. I think that if you want to change institutionally, you start with curriculum. I think knowing is the best form of helping out. So if you want to be educators, higher education or K-12, implementing maybe lessons, implementing history, literature, queer literature, or artists, or authors. I think if, especially here in the Valley, the more people know about something, the more normal it becomes. So I think that's a great point to start. Although not the fastest probably, but that's my take.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, thank you everyone for the opportunity. I think definitely like um these type of actionable steps can be a living document, and we can add and serve even more communities because as we discussed and as you're familiar, these issues that are targeting intersectional identities are not just targeting the queer and trans identity of these students or the transgender identity. It targets all of them, and ultimately, all of these different spheres that we talked about that compose our identity must be served by our educational institutions. And we as educators also have our own set of identities that must be taken care, protected, so that we can show up in these advocacy ways that all of you talked about. Um, so that's all I have for you. Um, I'll go ahead and stop sharing, and any questions, happy to answer.
Who's thinking of doing their work on transborder students? Raise your hand if you're thinking of doing your work on transborder students. Raise your hand high.
My work is related to LGBT, so.
Okay, great. So we have one student, LGBT. Are you thinking also transborder or?
Yeah.
So highly encourage you to check on Google Scholar, Carlos A. Fitch. You're gonna find some literature that you could consider adding for your 5 sources for your midterm.
Is there a way to contact Mr. Fitch? Awesome.
Mr. Fitch,
Yeah.
how can they reach you?
Yeah, let me put here my email. Don't call me Mr. I hate it.
So you can reach Carlos at cfitch at what is it?
UCSB.edu.
ucsb.edu.
Yeah.
Or you can go on Google Scholar and write Carlos A. Fitch, and you'll see all his literature there as well. Any other questions before we go to our break? We end Carlos' presentation. So just to kind of wrap all of this up, intersectionality is the concept that we're covering today. It's a very, it's complex, and something to consider is what are the multiple oppressions that communities face at the intersections of their social identities. And intersections of social identities could look like transborder experience life and queer identities. It could also look like gender. It could and race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and so many other intersections. So this is one example for you, and also one example of how your presentation for your midterm could also look like. I do want to make just a shameless plug as we say goodbye to Carlos, and that is that he will be joining us next week in person here. We're going to have a very dynamic, exciting, interesting session next week that is going to be focused on creating change in higher education through student-led activism. We've covered that already a couple of weeks ago through the documentary of the blowouts, but we're going to see how does that look like in practice in our campus with our student leaders. So Carlos will be joining us in person then. But for now, we sadly do have to say goodbye. Bye, Carlos. I know you don't want to leave, but we'll let you go. We know you have places to be. And we look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you. Looking forward to that too. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.